Hello, I'm Nancy Schumm-Burgess, the author of Wisconsin Barns. In traveling all over the state of Wisconsin to research my book, I came to really appreciate the cultural diversity and the variety of barns throughout this state. Today, we're in Greene County to explore two unique Swiss barns. And a lot of Swiss settlers came to this county around the mid-1850s, and they came here because the countryside resembled their land back at home. And we're going to explore two cantilevered Forebay barns, which were very similar to the Swiss style of barns that you can still find in Switzerland today. Our first barn that we're going to take a look at today is the Meinert barn near Monroe, Wisconsin. And it's an example of a giant Forebay cantilevered Swiss barn here in the county. The cantilevered design puts a lot of pressure on these beams right here that extend from the floor of the barn. And so this owner has put this system in here to help jack up the barn so that it's level again. As you travel around the state of Wisconsin, you'll see a lot of stone foundations of barns, and most of these stones are found in local quarries. And this one is no different. This quarried stone was cut from a quarry located probably about a mile away. Some people call this a Dutch door, and it opens in half like this, and it's just one of the many ventilation systems that were built throughout this gigantic barn. One of the other features of this door are the original wrought iron hinges. Another ventilation feature on this barn are the arched louvered windows, and you saw a lot of these on other Swiss barns in the region, and there's 14 of them just on the front of this barn. On the inside of the barn, you can see how the framework was constructed using posts vertically and beams horizontally, and they were joined together with mortise and tenon joints using wooden pegs. This barn, like many other Swiss barns, is built into the hillside. And what's extremely unusual about this barn is that it actually goes up to the way upper loft, which is on the third story of this barn. Most barns that are soil banked enter into the central threshing floor, which is the second level of the barn. The Meinert barn measures 102 feet by 40 feet by 45 feet tall, which would have allowed for a lot of hay storage in the lofts of this barn. And you can see by the light filtering through the ends of this barn that there was also a lot of ventilation, and that would allow the hay to dry properly. There's a 20-foot drop from the floor of the third level down to the floor of the central level. From a secret door in the upper lofts, you can have a spectacular view of the countryside. Built around 1880, the Meinert barn is one of the largest Swiss cantilevered barns in Greene County. For our second barn today, we are here in Greene County, Wisconsin, at the beautiful Hefty Bloom barn near New Glarus. This family settled this farm in 1848, and this barn that you see behind me was built in 1878. It was a giant dairy barn, and it was built in the tradition of the Schweitzer or Swiss barns that we see back in Switzerland even today. The biggest difference between the American Swiss barn and the European Swiss barn was that the Americans set the barn apart from the home, whereas the original Swiss barn would have included the home in the same structure. This was a beautiful setting for an early pioneer farm. It had the three basic elements for building a homestead. It had fresh, clean water that you could use for drinking and washing, feeding the animals, and of course protecting your family. It also had hardwood trees to use as building elements for your farm, buildings, and for your home. And it had that essential prairie soil. As early as 1678, Louis Joliet had sent word back about the prairie soils of the Midwest and how wonderful they were for farming. And farmers responded to that when they came west. They called this a German bank barn because the barn was actually built into the side of the hill here. And it was traditionally soil banked, sometimes intentionally, sometimes naturally, on the north face of the barn. And then in the southern face of the barn was left a little more open, and we'll see that in a minute. And that was where the animals would be stored, so they would be a little cooler. But the vehicles and equipment could drive right up to this soil bank on the second level of the barn and have easy access to the hay and the grain and all the things they would need to actually run the farm. We're now in the central threshing floor of the Hefty Bloom barn, and this would have been the entry level from that soil-banked section where the carriages and wagons could be driven easily into the barn to load or unload, whichever was needed. Behind me, you see the main framework of the interior of this barn, and it's built in an H-frame design, which was very common. It allowed for hay mows on either side of this central section, and the lumber was milled lumber, so it would have been brought from the North Woods, which were being lumbered readily by 1878, by train down to this region. And this would have been a less expensive way to purchase wood in those days. I'm standing right here next to the original siding of this barn, and you can see that originally it would have been a red color, and the red tint was made on the farm and colored with iron oxide, which could be found readily in the soils, and they would use it really more as a preservative than a paint. In later years, the family painted it white. But one of the things that also stands out about these planks is the size of them. They're about 10 inches wide and probably 20 or 30 feet in length. And that, too, is an indicator of the date of this barn. We're here in the milking parlor of this barn, and there's several features in here that make this very unique. Number one, the size of the beams in the lower level of this barn are really indicators of old trees that were probably taken off the original property here. And the craftsmen who built these would have used a broad axe to clear them, which is significantly different than those beams that were up in the upper level. Some of the other features of this barn that make it unique, although they were added at a later date, were the cleaning system in this milking parlor. So the cows would have faced that way, their bums would have faced this way, and this conveyor system would have come around and swept clean all the fecal matter to help keep this barn as sterile as possible. These beams still show the marks from the broad axe that would have been used to clear them, and these would have been called rough-hewn or hand-hewn beams. They are also whitewashed, and whitewashed interiors were a requirement in dairy farms in the early part of the 20th century. We're standing here in the lower level and the south face of this barn, and you can see the cantilevered extension to this barn. It's an extended forebay so that the upper level extended a little further out, and there was some shade here in this southern face of the barn because of this extension. Over time, this extension became very heavy, and it was reinforced with these steel posts to keep it up so that the barn itself wouldn't fall over. Here you can see the rough-hewn logs that were used to make up the main framework in the lower roof systems of this barn. And they were gigantic logs that were really just cleared of their bark and then cut at the ends so that they would make up this main support for the floors above. Originally, this barn had a cupola in the central portion of the barn to allow for ventilation in the upper lofts. But when the barn was expanded in 1919, they added these twin wind vents, and the wind vents would have allowed for a little more ventilation up in those upper lofts. The risk was that if you filled those lofts with hay and it didn't properly dry, you could have a spontaneous combustion situation, and that would have been a problem. This barn is another excellent example of the generations of families in Wisconsin who really treasured their heritage and preserved it for the next generation. For more information about Wisconsin's heritage barns, please visit the University of Wisconsin Extension's Barn Preservation Program website.